September 12, 1942, 7:42 in the morning, Eagle Farm Airfield, 6 miles outside Brisbane, Australia. Captain Paul Irvin Gunn, United States Navy Reserve, 43 years old, crouched beneath the wing of a Douglas A-20 Havoc attack bomber. He watched 2 mechanics from the 3rd Bombardment Group weld brackets into position. 4 Browning M2 machine guns, .5 caliber, lay on wooden crates beside the aircraft. Each weapon weighed 64 pounds. The mechanics were installing them where the bombardier's station used to be. The senior engineering officer at Wright Field Army Air Base in Ohio had reviewed Gunn's modification proposal 3 weeks earlier. His written response stated the concept violated basic principles of aircraft stability. The nose-mounted guns would shift the center of gravity too far forward. The aircraft would be unflyable. Major General George Kenney, the newly appointed commander of the 5th Air Force, had given Gunn 7 days to prove the Wright Field engineers wrong. They were all wrong. The mathematics seemed straightforward to the engineering officers. 4 .5 caliber machine guns weighed 256 pounds total. Add 200 rounds per gun, belted ammunition, another 200 pounds. Mount everything forward of the wing, ahead of the existing center of gravity. The aircraft nose would drop. The pilot would fight the controls constantly. The plane would stall on takeoff. Captain Edward Larner, commander of the 89th Attack Squadron, had expressed his concerns directly to Gunn 2 weeks earlier. Larner had witnessed 3 of his A-20 crews go down over the Coral Sea in July. Japanese transport ships had deck-mounted anti-aircraft weapons. The American bombers approached from high altitude. The bombardiers couldn't hit moving vessels. When the A-20s dropped to lower altitude for accuracy, the Japanese gunners tore them apart. Larner needed a solution. He wasn't convinced Gunn's forward-firing gun concept was that solution. His exact words, recorded in his personal log: "Turning bombers into fighter aircraft makes no tactical sense. We'll lose the bomb capacity and gain nothing." The 5th Air Force had documented specific losses. Between July 1st and July 31st, 1942, the 3rd Attack Group lost 11 A-20 Havoc bombers attempting to strike Japanese convoys supplying forces in New Guinea. 11 aircraft, 33 aircrew members. The Japanese were reinforcing their positions without significant interference. Standard doctrine, taught at every bombardier school in the United States, emphasized altitude. Bombers flew high, above the effective range of anti-aircraft fire. Bombardiers calculated lead angles, wind drift, target movement. They released their ordnance from 15,000 feet, sometimes 20,000 feet. Against stationary ground targets, the system worked. Against ships maneuvering at sea, the bombing accuracy averaged less than 5%. Gunn had a different approach. His concept required the bomber to fly at wave-top height, below 100 feet altitude. The aircraft would approach at maximum speed. Forward-facing guns would suppress the deck weapons before they could engage effectively. Then, at point-blank range, the bomber would release its payload using skip bombing technique. The bombs would skip across the water surface like flat stones, striking the ship's hull at or below the waterline. The engineering officers at Wright Field had never heard of skip bombing. They had calculated that forward-mounted heavy machine guns would make the aircraft uncontrollable. They recommended Gunn abandon the project immediately. General Kenney disagreed. He gave Gunn 1 week and access to whatever salvaged equipment he needed. Paul Irvin Gunn was born October 18, 1909, in Quitman, Arkansas, a small town in Cleburne County in the north-central part of the state. His father worked as a carpenter. His mother raised 5 children. Paul was the 2nd oldest. The family moved to Texas when Paul was 7 years old, settling in Seguin, southeast of San Antonio. He left school at age 15 and enlisted in the United States Navy in 1917, lying about his age. World War I had begun. Gunn served aboard destroyers in the Atlantic, learning mechanics and engines. He spent 4 years in the Navy, receiving his discharge in 1921 at age 21. He worked various jobs through the 1920s.
mechanic, machinery operator, aircraft maintenance. In 1927, he took a position with Philippine Aerial Taxi Company in Manila. The job involved maintaining and flying small commercial aircraft between the Philippine Islands. He became skilled with radial engines, the Wright Whirlwind and Pratt & Whitney Wasp models that powered most aircraft in that region. In 1928, Paul married Clarice Pauline Ott, called Polly, in Manila. They had 4 children over the next decade: Paul Jr., born 1929, Nathaniel, born 1931, Julie, born 1933, and Connie, born 1937. By 1939, Gunn had started his own inter-island airline with 5 Beechcraft aircraft. He flew routes connecting Manila, Cebu, and other Philippine cities. He also rejoined the Navy Reserve, commissioned as a lieutenant commander due to his previous service and aviation experience. When Japanese forces invaded the Philippines in December 1941, Gunn was in Manila. He attempted to evacuate his family. The Japanese advance was too rapid. His wife and 4 children were captured and interned at Santo Tomas University, which the Japanese had converted into a civilian prison camp. Gunn himself barely escaped on one of the last aircraft leaving Manila before the city fell on January 2, 1942. He arrived in Australia in February 1942. His family was imprisoned. He had no way to reach them. He requested immediate assignment to any combat unit operating in the Southwest Pacific. He wanted to fight his way back to Manila. The 5th Air Force needed experienced aviation mechanics and pilots. They assigned Gunn to the 3rd Attack Group as a technical advisor. His official role involved maintenance procedures and aircraft modifications. His actual role evolved into something entirely different.
Authoritative, yet engaging delivery, measured masculine voice with restrained emotionality, moderate pacing with strategic pauses for tension. Gunn began studying the tactical problem. Japanese convoys were supplying their forces throughout New Guinea and the surrounding islands. American bombers couldn't stop them. High-altitude bombing didn't work against moving ships. Low-altitude approaches exposed the bombers to devastating defensive fire. The Japanese ships mounted Type 96 25mm anti-aircraft guns. Effective range, 8,000 feet altitude, 5,000 yards horizontal distance. Rate of fire, 220 rounds per minute. A single transport ship carried 6 to 8 of these weapons. A destroyer carried 12 to 16. The American A-20 Havoc bomber approached with 4 .30 caliber machine guns in the nose. The .30 caliber round could penetrate aircraft skin. It bounced off ship armor plating. The Japanese gunners had time to track the approaching bomber and fire. The A-20s had no way to suppress that defensive fire. Gunn reasoned that if the bomber carried enough forward firepower, it could neutralize the deck gunners before they became effective. The .50 caliber Browning M2 machine gun fired a projectile heavy enough to penetrate light armor. Rate of fire, 450 rounds per minute per gun. 4 guns mounted together, 1,800 rounds per minute combined. That volume of fire, Gunn believed, would overwhelm any defensive position. The challenge was installation. The A-20 Havoc had a crew compartment in the nose where the bombardier sat. Gunn proposed removing the bombardier and the existing .30 caliber guns, then mounting 4 .50 caliber weapons on a fixed steel frame, all aimed directly forward. He sourced the guns from wrecked P-39 Airacobra and P-40 Warhawk fighters. These aircraft had been damaged beyond repair in combat or accidents. The guns were intact. Gunn had them removed and transported to Eagle Farm Airfield. The first installation took 3 days. The mechanics built the mounting frame from steel tubing and plate. They positioned the 4 guns side by side, angled slightly to create a converging fire pattern at 200 yards distance. They ran ammunition feeds from storage boxes mounted behind the guns. They connected firing controls to triggers the pilot could operate. Total additional weight, 456 pounds forward of the wing. The first test flight nearly ended in disaster. The Pacific War situation in mid-1942 favored Japan. Japanese forces controlled a defensive perimeter, stretching from the Aleutian Islands south through the Central Pacific, west through New Guinea, and northwest to Burma. They had captured Singapore, the Dutch East Indies, the Philippines, Wake Island, and Guam. They held every major port and airfield across thousands of miles of ocean. American strategy required breaking that perimeter. The first objective, stop Japanese reinforcement of their positions in New Guinea. The second objective, retake New Guinea and use it as a base for operations toward the Philippines. Japanese logistics depended on maritime transport. Troops, ammunition, food, fuel, everything moved by ship. The Imperial Japanese Navy ran regular convoys from their major base at Rabaul on the island of New Britain down to ports along New Guinea's northern coast. These convoys typically consisted of 6 to 12 transport vessels escorted by destroyers and sometimes cruisers. American intelligence could track these convoys through radio intercepts and aerial reconnaissance. The 5th Air Force had the aircraft to attack them. What the Air Force lacked was an effective method to engage ships at sea. Between March and July 1942, 5th Air Force bombers flew 163 sorties against Japanese shipping. They claimed 72 hits. Post-mission reconnaissance and captured Japanese records confirmed 11 ships sunk or damaged, an effectiveness rate of approximately 7%. The bombers were flying from bases in Australia and Port Moresby on New Guinea's southern coast. The Japanese convoys sailed along New Guinea's northern coast, requiring the bombers to cross the Owen Stanley mountain range. The mountains reached elevations above 13,000 feet. Weather was unpredictable. Heavy clouds, severe turbulence, icing conditions. The B-17 Flying Fortress bombers attacked from high altitude, typically 20,000 to 25,000 feet. At that height, bombardiers had difficulty tracking moving ships through cloud cover. Even in clear conditions, the ships maneuvered. A transport traveling at 12 knots covered 20 feet per second. From 20,000 feet altitude, a bomb required approximately 30 seconds to reach the surface. The ship could be 600 feet from its position when the bombardier released. The A-20 Havoc and B-25 Mitchell medium bombers tried lower altitudes, between 8,000 and 12,000 feet. Accuracy improved, but not enough. Ship captains watched for bomb releases and ordered evasive turns. The mathematics of hitting a maneuvering target from altitude made success improbable. Some pilots attempted very low altitude attacks, coming in at 500 feet or less. The Japanese deck gunners tracked them easily at that height. The 25mm anti-aircraft rounds tore through aluminum aircraft skin. In July alone, the 89th Attack Squadron lost 7 aircraft attempting low-level attacks against a single convoy. Captain Edward Larner had commanded that squadron. He had personally witnessed 3 of those aircraft go down. One crew managed to ditch near the coast. Australian coast watchers rescued them. The other 2 crews were never recovered. Larner knew something had to change. The squadron was losing crews faster than replacements arrived. The Japanese convoys kept coming. New Guinea was being reinforced daily. Without an effective anti-shipping capability, the Allied position would collapse. When Paul Gunn approached him with the forward gun modification concept, Larner was skeptical, but desperate enough to listen. The Douglas A-20 Havoc was a twin-engine light bomber manufactured by Douglas Aircraft Company. The Air Corps had ordered it in 1939. First deliveries reached operational units in 1941. By mid-1942, approximately 800 were in service across all theaters. Specifications: wingspan 61 feet, length 48 feet, height 18 feet, 2 Wright R2600 radial engines, 1,600 horsepower each. Maximum speed, 338 miles per hour at 12,000 feet. Service ceiling, 25,000 feet. Range, 1,000 miles with standard fuel load. Crew of 3. Pilot, bombardier/navigator, and gunner. Standard armament, 4.30 caliber machine guns in the nose, 2.50 caliber guns in a dorsal turret, 1.50 caliber gun in a ventral position. Bomb load,
2,000 pounds internal. The .30 caliber Browning machine gun fired a 150-grain bullet at 2,800 feet per second muzzle velocity, effective against personnel and unarmored vehicles, not effective against ships. The .50 caliber Browning M2 fired a 660-grain bullet at 2,900 feet per second. The armor-piercing variant could penetrate 0.9 inches of armor plate at 500 yards. It could also penetrate aircraft aluminum at ranges exceeding 2,000 yards. This was the weapon Gunn wanted mounted in the nose. The Browning M2 had been designed in 1918, late in World War I, as an anti-tank weapon. John Browning himself had developed it. The military adopted it in 1933 after refinements. By 1942, it equipped most American fighters, bombers, and ground vehicles as a heavy machine gun. Each M2 weighed 84 pounds with its mount, minus ammunition. The weapon measured 65 inches long. Rate of fire, 450 to 550 rounds per minute depending on configuration. The version Gunn was using came from P-39 and P-40 fighters, set for approximately 500 rounds per minute. Ammunition. .50 caliber cartridges came in several types. Armor-piercing incendiary was most common for air-to-air combat. Each round weighed approximately 4 ounces. The brass cartridge case weighed another 1.5 ounces. Total weight per round, about 5.5 ounces. A 200-round belt weighed roughly 70 pounds. Gunn's modification involved mounting 4 M2 machine guns where the A-20's bombardier sat. The bombardier position was a compartment in the nose, forward of the pilot, with a plexiglass enclosure providing visibility for bomb aiming. Gunn proposed removing the plexiglass, removing the bombardier seat and equipment, and installing a welded steel frame to hold the 4 guns side by side. Total weight addition, 4 guns at 84 pounds each equals 336 pounds. 4 ammunition boxes, 200 rounds each, another 280 pounds. Gun mounting frame, 50 pounds. Ammunition feed mechanisms and firing controls, 30 pounds. Total, approximately 700 pounds added to the nose, forward of the wing.
The engineers at Wright Field had calculated the impact. The A-20's empty weight was 15,700 pounds. Center of gravity at empty weight, 11.2 feet aft of the nose. Adding 700 pounds at approximately 4 feet from the nose would shift the center of gravity forward by roughly 2.4 inches. 2.5 inches doesn't sound significant. In aircraft design, it's critical. The A-20 was designed with a specific center of gravity range. Too far forward, and the tail surfaces lack sufficient authority to raise the nose. The aircraft won't rotate on takeoff. It won't climb. In extreme cases, it will nose over. Wright Field's analysis concluded the modification would place the center of gravity outside acceptable limits. Their recommendation: disapprove the modification request. General Kenney read their report. Then he asked Gunn a simple question. Can you make it work? Gunn said he could. Kenney told him to try. 1 week, 1 aircraft. If it flew successfully, they'd modify more. If it didn't, they'd find another solution. Gunn took a damaged A-20 that had been written off for parts. He removed the bombardier station completely. He built the gun mounting frame himself, working with 2 mechanics from the 3rd Air Depot Squadron. They installed the 4 .50 caliber guns. They mounted 4 200-round ammunition boxes in the compartment behind the guns. They connected the ammunition feeds using flexible metal chutes. They ran electrical firing controls up to the pilot's control column. Then they had to solve the balance problem. Gunn moved equipment aft. He relocated the radio from its original position behind the pilot to a position near the tail. He moved battery units. He adjusted the elevator trim tab to provide more nose-up force at neutral. He calculated, by hand, without engineering software, how much weight he needed to shift and where to shift it. The first test flight was scheduled for September 8, 1942. The test pilot was Lieutenant James Brewer, age 26, from Fort Worth, Texas. Brewer had flown A-20s for 8 months. He had 340 hours in type. Brewer climbed into the cockpit, started both engines, completed his pre-takeoff checks. The aircraft taxied normally. He lined up on the runway, advanced the throttles to takeoff power, released the brakes.
The A-20 accelerated. At 90 miles per hour, rotation speed, Brewer pulled back on the control column. The nose didn't rise. The aircraft continued accelerating down the runway, nose down. Brewer pulled harder. The nose came up slightly, then dropped again. The A-20 used 4,500 feet of runway before finally staggering into the air at 120 miles per hour, 30 miles per hour above normal rotation speed. Brewer climbed to 1,000 feet. The aircraft felt nose heavy, wanting to descend. He had to maintain constant back pressure on the controls. He flew for 20 minutes, testing control responses. The A-20 would fly, but it was dangerous. A less experienced pilot might have crashed on takeoff. Brewer landed and reported to Gunn, "It'll kill somebody the way it is now." Gunn spent the next 2 days making adjustments. He moved more weight aft. He increased the elevator trim. He adjusted the horizontal stabilizer angle. On September 10th, they tried again. Lieutenant Brewer took off. This time, the aircraft rotated normally. It climbed at acceptable rate. Brewer reported the handling was unusual but manageable. The nose-heavy tendency remained, but a pilot could compensate. Gunn declared the modification successful. On September 12th, 16 modified A-20 Havocs flew their first combat mission.
The target was Buna, a Japanese-held airfield on New Guinea's northern coast. Intelligence reported approximately 30 Japanese aircraft on the ground, 0 fighters, Betty bombers, and reconnaissance planes. The airfield also served as a supply depot, with storage buildings and troop barracks nearby. 16 A-20 strafers took off from Port Moresby at 06:15 hours on September 12th. Captain Edward Larner led the formation. Paul Gunn flew as co-pilot in Larner's aircraft. They crossed the Owen Stanley Mountains at 9,000 feet, then descended on the northern side. The formation approached Buna from the southeast at 250 miles per hour, altitude 100 feet above the treetops. Japanese lookouts spotted them at 3 miles distance. Air raid alarms sounded across the airfield. Soldiers ran for anti-aircraft positions. Pilots ran toward their aircraft, attempting to take off before the attack arrived. The first 4 A-20s opened fire at 1,200 yards distance. 64.50 caliber machine guns combined rate of fire approximately 32,000 rounds per minute. The tracers walked across the airfield like searchlight beams. They struck the parked aircraft first. The Betty bombers, with their unarmored fuel tanks, burst into flames immediately. 0 fighters disintegrated as the heavy bullets punched through their thin aluminum skin. The second group of 4 strafers targeted the anti-aircraft positions. Japanese soldiers were swinging their 25mm guns toward the attacking aircraft. They never completed the traverse. The .50 caliber rounds hit the gun crews before they could fire. At 100 feet altitude and 250 miles per hour, the A-20s crossed the airfield perimeter in 12 seconds. The third and fourth groups strafed the buildings and dispersal areas. Japanese personnel dove for cover. The .50 caliber bullets tore through wooden structures, through sandbag walls, through anything that wasn't solid concrete or steel. The entire attack lasted 90 seconds. 16 A-20s made one pass over Buna Airfield and continued southeast, climbing back toward the Owen Stanley Mountains. They didn't need a second pass. Post-strike reconnaissance photographs showed 14 Japanese aircraft destroyed on the ground, 3 anti-aircraft positions neutralized, multiple buildings on fire. No A-20s were lost. No A-20s took significant damage. 2 aircraft returned with minor bullet holes from ground fire that had been too late to aim effectively. General Kenney reviewed the reconnaissance photos that evening. He immediately ordered 12 more A-20s modified with forward-firing guns. Then he asked Gunn if the concept would work on a larger aircraft. Gunn said it would work on the B-25 Mitchell, longer range, heavier bomb load, more space for additional guns. Kenney told him to try it.
The B-25 Mitchell was a twin-engine medium bomber, larger than the A-20. North American Aviation had designed it in 1939. The Air Corps received the first production models in 1941, named after General Billy Mitchell, the aviation pioneer. By late 1942, approximately 2,000 were in service worldwide. Specifications: wingspan 67 feet, length 53 feet, height 16 feet. 2 Wright R2600 engines, same as the A-20, but the B-25 was heavier. Maximum speed 275 miles per hour. Service ceiling 24,000 feet. Range 1,350 miles. Crew of 5. Pilot, co-pilot, navigator/bombardier, turret gunner, radio operator/waist gunner. Standard armament: 1.50 caliber machine gun in the nose, 2.50 caliber guns in a dorsal turret, 2.50 caliber guns in a waist positions. Bomb load 3,000 pounds internal. Gunn proposed a radical modification: remove the navigator and bombardier and the plexiglass nose. Install 4.50 caliber guns in the nose compartment. Add 4 more .50 caliber guns in external pods mounted on the fuselage sides, called cheek guns. Rotate the dorsal turret forward so its 2 guns could fire ahead. Total 10 forward-firing .50 caliber machine guns. The engineering challenges were greater than with the A-20. The B-25 had a longer nose, requiring a different mounting frame design. The cheek gun pods had to be aerodynamically shaped to minimize drag. The turret rotation mechanism needed modification to allow forward firing while protecting the pilot's compartment from ejected shell casings. Gunn worked with mechanics from the 81st Air Depot Group at Townsville, Australia. They completed the first modified B-25 in December 1942. The aircraft had 10 forward-firing guns and carried a full bomb load in the internal bay.
Test flights revealed the same nose-heavy tendency as the A-20, but more pronounced. The additional weight forward, now over 800 pounds, required significant trim adjustments. Gunn moved equipment aft. He adjusted the horizontal stabilizer. He added ballast weight in the tail section. The second test flight showed acceptable handling characteristics. General Kenny was in the United States when he received word that the first B-25 strafer had flown successfully. He was meeting with General Henry Hap Arnold, commanding general of the Army Air Forces. Arnold asked whether the modifications were officially approved by engineering evaluation. Kenny said no. Wright Field had disapproved them as impractical. Arnold asked how many modified aircraft were currently flying in the Pacific. Kenny said 30 A-20s and 1 B-25, with 12 more B-25s under modification. Arnold immediately called Wright Field and ordered them to review the modification data from Australia. The engineers studied the reports for 3 days. They sent a response. The modifications violated standard design principles and should be discontinued immediately. All modified aircraft should be grounded pending proper engineering analysis. General Arnold read the Wright Field message. Then he read the combat reports from the Southwest Pacific. The modified strafers had flown 47 missions without a single loss. They had destroyed over 60 Japanese aircraft on the ground and engaged 12 surface vessels. Arnold sent a message to Wright Field. The modifications are approved. Prepare production drawings for factory integration. By February 1943, the 5th Air Force had 32 modified B-25 strafers operational in the Southwest Pacific.
On February 28, 1943, Allied codebreakers at the Central Bureau in Melbourne decrypted a Japanese naval message. A convoy was departing Rabaul, destination Lae, on New Guinea's northern coast. 8 transport ships, 8 destroyer escorts, approximately 6,900 troops aboard. Scheduled arrival, March 4th. General Kenny had 72 hours to stop them. The convoy's route would take it through the Bismarck Sea, the body of water between New Britain Island and New Guinea, approximately 400 miles of open ocean. March was monsoon season in that region. Heavy clouds, frequent rain, poor visibility. Japanese commanders believed the weather would protect them. Allied bombers couldn't hit what they couldn't see. Kenny assembled every available aircraft. B-17 Flying Fortresses would attack from high altitude to draw defensive fire upward. Then the strafers, 12 B-25s and 30 A-20s, would come in at wave-top height. The concept was skip bombing. A bomber approaching at very low altitude, 100 feet or less, releases its bombs with enough forward velocity that they skip across the water surface like flat stones. The bombs skip once, twice, sometimes 3 times before hitting the target ship's hull at or below the waterline. At that point, the fuse detonates. The Americans had tested skip bombing techniques in training. The method worked, but it required the bomber to close to extremely close range, 500 yards or less. At that range, Japanese deck guns would be devastating, unless those guns were suppressed. That's where the forward-firing machine guns became critical. The B-25 and A-20 strafers would come in firing at maximum range, approximately 1,200 yards. The volume of fire, 42 B-25s and A-20s combined, carrying approximately 400 forward-firing guns total, would force the Japanese gunners to take cover. Then, while the deck crews were pinned down, the strafers would release their bombs at point-blank range and break away. In theory, the tactic would work. In practice, nobody had tried it against a defended convoy. Captain Edward Larner briefed the 89th and 90th Attack Squadrons on the evening of March 2nd. He explained the approach pattern, the firing sequence, the bomb release parameters. The pilots listened in silence. Everyone understood they would be flying directly into the teeth of Japanese anti-aircraft fire. The forward guns would help. Whether they would be enough remained to be seen. Paul Gunn attended the briefing. He was officially a technical advisor, not assigned to a combat crew. He told Larner he wanted to fly the mission. Larner said absolutely not. Gunn was too valuable, his knowledge of the modifications too critical. If something happened to him, nobody else could replicate his work. Gunn didn't argue, but when the strike force assembled on March 3rd, he was in the co-pilot seat of Larner's B-25.
March 3rd, 1943, 0630 hours. Port Moresby Airfield. 137 aircraft prepared for launch. 28 B-17 Flying Fortresses. 12 B-25 strafers, 30 modified A-20 strafers, 13 Australian Beaufighters for top cover, 54 P-38 Lightning fighters for escort. The weather forecast showed scattered clouds over the Bismarck Sea, visibility 3 to 5 miles, better than expected. The convoy was approximately 70 miles northwest of Leh when aerial reconnaissance located it at 0600 hours. 8 transports in column formation, destroyers positioned as escorts on both flanks. The strike force launched in groups, B-17s first, climbing to altitude, then the strafers at low level. P-38s established combat air patrol overhead, watching for Japanese Zero fighters from Rabaul. At 0900 hours, the B-17s began their attack runs from 20,000 feet. They dropped 137 bombs. The Japanese ships maneuvered violently, leaving wakes like white ribbons on the blue water. The transport's anti-aircraft guns fired, filling the sky with black puffs. The B-17s reported multiple bomb hits. Post-mission analysis showed no ships were sunk in the high-altitude attack, but the Japanese crews were looking up now, tracking the heavy bombers. Every anti-aircraft gun was oriented skyward. Then the strafers arrived. Captain Larner led 12 B-25s in from the southeast at 50 feet above the water. Line abreast formation, 3 miles wide. The Japanese lookouts on the transport Kyokusei Maru spotted them at approximately 2 miles distance, closing at 4 miles per minute. The ship's captain ordered hard to starboard, attempting to present a narrower target profile. Too slow. At 1,200 yards distance, all 12 B-25s opened fire. 120 .50 caliber machine guns firing simultaneously. The sound was continuous, like heavy canvas tearing. The tracers looked like red horizontal rain. They struck the water first, walking across the surface in straight lines. then climbing onto the ship's hull and superstructure. The bridge windows shattered. The anti-aircraft crews dove for cover. The guns on the port side never fired a single round. The guns on the starboard side fired 3 bursts before the crews were forced down.
3 B-25s broke formation and converged on Kioksei-Maru from slightly different angles. They released their bombs at 100 yards distance. The bombs left the aircraft with forward momentum, matching the aircraft's speed, 275 miles per hour, approximately 400 feet per second. They hit the water nose first, skipped like stones, rose into the air, descended again, skipped a second time, then struck Kioksei-Maru's hull 2 feet below the waterline. 2 bombs hit. The first penetrated the hull plating and detonated inside the engine room. The explosion destroyed both boiler units and ruptured the main fuel bunker. The second bomb hit amidships, detonating against a reinforced bulkhead. The explosion killed 42 soldiers in the troop compartment below. Kioksei-Maru was dead in the water 30 seconds after the B-25s opened fire, listing to port. Smoke pouring from 3 locations. The ship would sink in 40 minutes. The transport Teo-Maru attempted to run. The captain ordered maximum speed, 15 knots, approximately 17 miles per hour. The B-25s were traveling at 275 miles per hour. The mathematics were simple. 4 strafers approached Teo-Maru from the port side, while 3 more came in from starboard. The simultaneous attack from both directions split the defensive fire. The Japanese gunners couldn't cover both approaches. They chose to engage the portside group. That left the starboard group unopposed. 7 B-25s released bombs at close range. 5 bombs hit. The first struck forward, near the bow. The explosion breached the hull below the waterline and flooded the forward cargo hold. The second and third bombs hit amidships within 2 seconds of each other. The combined detonations broke the ship's keel. The hull structure failed. Teo-Maru broke in 2 pieces. The ship sank in 6 minutes. Approximately 1,400 Japanese soldiers were below decks. Most never reached the upper decks before the sections went under. Those who made it to the water were wearing full combat gear, rifles, packs, ammunition. The equipment weighed 60 pounds or more. It pulled them under. The destroyer Shikinami attempted to screen the remaining transports. The ship's captain maneuvered between the strafers and the convoy, using his vessel as a shield. The destroyer mounted 16 25mm anti-aircraft guns and 8 5-inch dual-purpose guns. Significant firepower. But the destroyer was alone, and the strafers were coming from multiple directions.
Australian Beaufighter aircraft strafed Shikinami's deck from the port side, forcing the gun crews to take cover. While the Japanese personnel were pinned down, 3 B-25s attacked from the starboard side. The destroyer tried to turn into the attack, standard defensive maneuver. The turn was too slow. Bombs struck the port side, the starboard side, and the stern. Shikinami didn't sink immediately, but the damage was catastrophic. 2 boilers destroyed, steering disabled, fire spreading to the ammunition storage. The crew abandoned ship 2 hours later. By 09:30 hours, the Japanese convoy was scattered across 40 square miles of ocean, 5 transports sinking or burning, 2 destroyers crippled. The remaining ships attempted to reach Lae. They didn't make it. The strafers returned at 1400 hours. Fresh aircraft from Port Moresby, full bomb and ammunition loads. The Japanese had no fighter cover. Their Zeros had landed at Lae to refuel and were on the ground when the second strike arrived. The transport Oigawa Maru took 12 bomb hits in the second attack. The ship's magazine detonated. The explosion was visible from the reconnaissance aircraft 50 miles away. When the smoke cleared, there was no wreckage, no survivors. Approximately 1,800 Japanese soldiers and the entire ship's crew gone in less than 3 seconds. By evening on March 3rd, every transport in the convoy was sunk or sinking. 4 destroyers were at the bottom of the Bismarck Sea. Of the nearly 6,900 Japanese troops that departed Rabaul, approximately 1,200 reached Lae by emergency barge or small boat. Another 2,700 were rescued by Japanese submarines and returned to Rabaul. The rest perished in the water. Allied losses: 4 aircraft, 1 B-17, 3 P-38s, 13 aircrew members.
0 strafers lost. General Douglas MacArthur called it one of the most complete and annihilating combats of all time. The Japanese never again attempted to reinforce New Guinea by large convoy. The war in the Southwest Pacific had turned, and it turned because of Paul Gunn's forward-firing gun modifications.
General Kenny sent a message to General Arnold in Washington on March 5, 1943. Subject line, Commerce Destroyer. Modifications approved for production. The message body contained one paragraph. 12 B-25 strafers had destroyed an entire Japanese convoy with minimal losses. Request immediate factory integration of forward gun package into all B-25 production aircraft. Arnold called Dutch Kindleberger, president of North American Aviation, that afternoon. The company manufactured the B-25. Kindleberger said his engineers would need to see the modification specifications. Arnold said he was sending the man who designed them. Paul Gunn was going to California. Gunn didn't want to leave Australia. His wife Polly and their 4 children were still imprisoned at Santo Tomas camp in Manila, 14 months in captivity. He flew every mission, hoping to get closer to the Philippines. Going to California meant going the wrong direction. Kenny made it an order. The 5th Air Force needed factory-built strafers, hundreds of them. Gunn was the only person who could show North American Aviation exactly how the modifications worked. The general promised Gunn would be back in the Pacific within 6 weeks. Gunn landed in Long Beach, California on March 27, 1943. The North American Aviation plant covered 140 acres, 20,000 workers on 3 shifts. The B-25 assembly line produced 1 aircraft every 4 hours. The factory engineers studied Gunn's hand-drawn blueprints. They asked about stress calculations. Gunn said he didn't have any. He'd calculated the weight and balance by hand. They asked about wind tunnel testing. Gunn said he'd tested by flying the aircraft. They asked how he'd solved the center of gravity problem. Gunn showed them where he'd relocated equipment aft to compensate. One engineer pointed out that the cheek gun mounting would buckle the fuselage skin. The muzzle blast from .50 caliber guns would peel the aluminum. Gunn said yes, it did. Then he showed them the blast tubes he'd welded to extend the gun barrels beyond the propeller arc. Problem solved. The factory engineers spent 2 weeks reverse engineering Gunn's field modifications into production drawings. They strengthened the nose structure with heavier gauge aluminum. They redesigned the gun mounts with better reinforcement. They added stiffening plates around the cheek gun positions. They calculated the exact center of gravity shift and designed adjustable ballast compartments in the tail. The first factory-built B-25G strafer rolled off the assembly line May 10, 1943. 4 .50 caliber guns in the solid nose, 1 75mm M4 cannon in the forward fuselage, the same gun used in the M3 Lee tank. The cannon fired a 15-pound high-explosive shell with enough force to hole a destroyer below the waterline. Gunn test flew the prototype. The 75mm cannon recoiled 4 feet when fired. The entire aircraft shuddered. The navigator had to manually reload the cannon between shots. Rate of fire, 1 round every 30 seconds. Gunn reported the weapon would work against ships, possibly against bunkers, not against anything moving quickly. North American Aviation built 400 B-25G strafers. Then they improved the design.
The B-25H model added 4 more 50 caliber guns in enlarged cheek packs, 8 guns in the nose, 4 in the cheeks, 2 in the dorsal turret rotated forward, 14 forward-firing guns total. The H model kept the 75mm cannon, but improved the recoil system and added a faster loading mechanism. Rate of fire increased to 1 round every 20 seconds. The B-25J removed the 75mm cannon and added 4 more 50 caliber guns in the nose, 18 forward-firing guns, the most heavily armed production bomber in history. North American Aviation built 4,900 B-25J strafers between 1943 and 1945. The modifications Gunn had pioneered in Brisbane became standard factory configuration. The strafer variant B-25s served throughout the Pacific, sinking over 800 Japanese vessels. They also served in the Mediterranean theater, where they attacked German convoys supplying North Africa. China-Burma-India theater units used them against Japanese supply lines along the Burma Road. The tactical doctrine changed. Before Gunn, bombers attacked from altitude. After Gunn, bombers became multi-role weapons, strafing, skip bombing, and close air support. The concept influenced post-war aircraft design. The AC-130 gunship, used in Vietnam, was a direct descendant of Gunn's strafer modifications. So was the A-10, the Thunderbolt II, designed specifically for forward-firing gun attack. Military training incorporated skip bombing as standard anti-shipping doctrine. The technique was taught at all bombardment schools from 1943 forward. Thousands of pilots learned the method that Gunn had proven at Bismarck Sea. By the end of the war, strafer variants of the B-25 had flown over 60,000 combat sorties in the Pacific. They were credited with destroying over 2,000 Japanese aircraft on the ground and neutralizing an estimated 85,000 enemy troops. The modifications that Wright Field had called impossible had become the 5th Air Force's most effective tactical weapon.
Paul Gunn returned to Australia in May 1943. He'd been gone exactly 6 weeks, as Kenny had promised. His family remained imprisoned in Manila. The war continued for another 2 years. Gunn flew combat missions throughout 1943 and 1944. He wasn't required to. He was a technical officer, headquarters staff, but his family was in Manila, and every mission took him closer. He modified additional aircraft, trained crews, and flew strike missions himself. At age 44, he was the oldest pilot regularly flying combat in the 5th Air Force. On November 27, 1944, Japanese bombers hit Tacloban Airfield in the Philippines where Gunn was stationed. He was in the operations tent reviewing mission plans when the bomb struck. Shrapnel hit him in the left leg and shoulder. The surgeon said he wouldn't fly again for at least 6 months. The injuries qualified him for medical retirement. Gunn said he wasn't going anywhere until his family was free. American forces liberated Manila in February 1945. Santo Tomas Camp was freed on February 3rd. 3,700 Allied prisoners released. Gunn's wife Polly weighed 89 pounds. His daughter Julie weighed 63 pounds. They'd been eating rice and vegetable soup once a day for the past year. His son Nathaniel had malaria. His youngest daughter had dysentery. Gunn flew to Manila on February 4th against medical orders. He found his family in the makeshift hospital the Army had established. Polly didn't recognize him at first. He'd lost 40 pounds and his hair had gone completely gray. Then he spoke her name, and she knew. The reunion lasted 4 hours. Then Gunn returned to duty. The war wasn't over. The modified strafers kept flying until Japan surrendered in August 1945. The Army retired Colonel Paul Gunn on June 30, 1948. Medical disability due to the wounds received at Tacloban. He was 48 years old.
Gunn returned to the Philippines and rebuilt Philippine Airlines, the company he'd started before the war. The airline resumed operations in 1946. With 3 surplus C-47 transport aircraft. By 1956, Philippine Airlines was flying international routes to Hong Kong, Bangkok, Singapore, and San Francisco. The Philippine government awarded Gunn the Distinguished Service Star in 1947. President Manuel Roxas presented the medal personally. The citation read, "For extraordinary heroism and exceptional service to the Republic of the Philippines during the Liberation Campaign." The United States military had decorated Gunn with the Distinguished Flying Cross with Oak Leaf Cluster, Silver Star, Legion of Merit, Air Medal with multiple oak leaf clusters, and 9 Purple Hearts. The Distinguished Service Cross was recommended but never approved. Some officers believed Gunn's contributions were technical rather than tactical. They were wrong. On October 10, 1957, Gunn chartered a Beechcraft Model 18 twin-engine aircraft. He was flying from Manila to Baguio, a routine trip of 140 miles. Weather forecast showed scattered thunderstorms. Not unusual. He filed his flight plan at 0800 hours.
Departure time, 0930 hours. Expected arrival, 1100 hours. The weather deteriorated faster than forecast. By 10:30, the Cordillera Mountains were covered in heavy clouds, rain, low visibility, turbulence. The Beechcraft's radio went silent at 10:47 hours. Search and rescue teams found the wreckage 3 days later on a mountainside near Baguio. The aircraft had flown into a storm cell. The pilot had tried to climb above it. The winds had driven them into the ridge. Impact was instantaneous. Paul Irvin Gunn died October 11, 1957. He was 57 years old, 58 in 1 week. The Philippine government gave him a state funeral. 6,000 people attended. Veterans, Philippine Airlines employees, former prisoners from Santo Tomas. General Kenny sent a wreath from the United States.
The National Museum of the Pacific War in Fredericksburg, Texas, displays one of Gunn's original gun mounting drawing. The paper is yellowed now. The measurements are handwritten in pencil. The sketch shows 4 .50 caliber guns mounted inside an A-20 nose compartment. No computer modeling, no stress calculations, just the drawing that helped turn the tide at Bismarck Sea. The Air Force Association inducted Gunn into the Air Force Enlisted Heritage Hall in 2008. The citation mentioned his innovations, his combat record, his influence on modern attack aviation. The ceremony was held in Washington. 3 of his grandchildren attended. His son Nathaniel joined the Air Force, flew B-52s during Vietnam, and retired as a colonel. He wrote a book about his father, titled Pappy Gunn, published in 1994. Philippine Airlines still operates today. The company flies to 42 destinations across Asia, Australia, and North America. The headquarters, in Manila, has a portrait of Gunn in the main lobby. Most employees don't know who he is. Most people have never heard of Paul Gunn. The engineers at Wright Field declared his modifications impossible. General Kenny gave him 7 days to prove them wrong. He proved them wrong in 4 days at Buna. Then he proved them wrong again at Bismarck Sea. Then North American Aviation built 5,300 strafers using his concept. Those strafers sank over 800 Japanese ships. They destroyed over 2,000 aircraft on the ground. They changed how air forces think about bombers and attack aviation. The concept Gunn pioneered in a hangar in Brisbane became the foundation for every modern ground attack aircraft. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. It tells YouTube to share this with more people who care about preserving these histories. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're sharing forgotten stories from the greatest generation every week. Real people, real heroism. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Did anyone in your family serve in World War II? Share their branch of service. You're not just a viewer. You're part of keeping these memories alive. Thank you for watching. Thank you for making sure Paul Gunn and men like him don't disappear into silence. They deserve to be remembered. You're helping make that happen.